Hailing back from the days of Medarots 3 and 4, this model shines a brilliant blazing sunlight on any battlefield she descends upon. This is SUN00 Meda-Sun, with a kit of Meteor Beam, Flame, Double Fire, Biped Legs, and the leg ability of Combustion, which, upon receiving a damage over time effect from fire, will restore the HP lost from the effect and then buff all leg stats minus armor and heavy limit. Now, combustion and heat-based attacks like this are most certainly things that we've started seeing more and more often these days, but one thing I will never tire of seeing are models from the early days of the older Medarot titles, 3 and 4, even a bit from 5 too from time to time, are always wonderful to see, not just with getting new models and fresh looks, but even getting their kits either completely retooled or even redesigned to suit how they behaved in the early games, just as they were before. Meda-Sun, featuring a lot of brilliant and blazing lights, is most certainly no exception to this case. Meteor Beam on the head part is a new skill which kind of serves alongside the series of skills we've been having in the last several weeks to a couple of years now, where they essentially will fuse different effects into one to create a new one. Meteor Beam is, as the name implies, it is the effect of Meteor, which is a shooting-based skill that will set the user on fire with a damage over time effect, but gets damage plus as long as the user keeps that effect applied to them. However, unlike Meteor, which is a gunpowder-based skill and has a fixed 1.5 damage, it also features an optic attribute instead. So this means it has a double damage at 30% charge and a times 3 damage at 100% charge. So this makes Meteor Beam a whole lot more dangerous to use than standard Meteor, and even on par with something close to, say, like Hyper Beam or Beam Sword or anything else of the like with that extra damage bonus. And given that it's packing an over base 2000 power before any other modifiers come into play, that is going to be extremely painful. The only real drawbacks to Meteor Beam is the fact that it does have a fairly low heating and cooling, and its success could leave a bit to be desired at 720, but it only has 2 shots, so you want to make sure you use those extremely carefully when you're going to actually fire those off. Flame on the right arm is a conventional melee skill that also, much like Meteor does, or the effect of Meteor Beam, will apply a fire damage over time effect to the user in question. But as long as that damage over time effect remains on the user, they will also be applied with a times 1.5 damage boost every time they use Flame consecutively. So essentially, you can go from firing Meteor Beam to essentially using anything else just as easily, and Meda-Sun gets extremely and extraordinarily aggressive right out of the gate. Double Fire on the left arm is another conventional melee skill that, instead of applying 1 stack of fire to the enemy, much like regular, as the name implies, it will be applying 2 stacks of fire to the target, and then 1 to self. So I think you're kind of seeing a pattern here with what's going on. Meteor Beam essentially will only apply the DOT to self. Flame and Double Fire will inflict it to the user and the target, but Double Fire is probably the most forwardly aggressive with the DOTs by inflicting 2 building stacks on it instead of just 1. Biped Legs means that Meda-Sun will be fairly good on any terrain across the board, and fairly decent terrain compatibility at that. And leg stats are actually pretty solid too for what Meda-Sun brings to the table, and this is not even including before Combustion comes into play with the kind of effect that it leads. A base mobility of 888 is very solid, as this means Meda-Sun will have a fairly solid base start in the speed department before any other factors come into play, such as Medarot bonus or terrain or anything else such as like power chips. An evade of 1269 also is nice, as this does mean Meda-Sun will have a fairly decent time dodging or grazing as she sees fit, and as long as she's not hit with a no dodge penalty on a cooldown or through any kind of negative symptom. A melee resist of 1144 and a shoot resist of 1075 are also fairly nice in that little sweet spot you want to be in with Biped Legs, or even just in the resist stats in general. In the armor department, she's packing about 4,200 for the head, about 3,659 per arm, and just over 4,000 for the legs, so fairly healthy in the HP department as well. But it is worth noting, additionally to this, that Combustion actually will make her progressively faster, more dodgy, and more resistant the longer the fight drags out. Because, in contrast to most DOTs having you progressively lose your HP over time, Combustion allows you to recover the HP lost from a damage over time effect, and then stack on it with a leg stats plus. So, like I said, she will be going progressively faster, she will have a higher likelihood of dodging, and she can reduce incoming damage just a little bit more efficiently than she could before. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I honestly have to rate Meda-Sun a very well-rounded 8 out of 10 across the board. She is extremely synergetic unto herself, essentially as a one-woman shining light for any field that she comes upon, and she covers a lot of her weaknesses fairly well and in very interesting ways that one may not think too much of immediately. Meteor Beam, Flame, and Double Fire all will synergize extremely well with Combustion as a return on investment with progressive boost to all leg stats, and that heal over time, preventing Meda-Sun from falling too easily. And from Flame and Double Fire, also getting damage bonuses on top of that. The only real thing to pay attention to is the fact that because they are DOTs, you do want to make sure that you don't entirely ignore Meda-Sun, because she can still get crippled or taken out just as easily. However, it is also worth noting that because the flame effects of Flame and Double Fire and even Combustion are not reliant on the enemy maintaining the negative symptom, Stat Cleanse is something that will be entirely ineffective in preventing Meda-Sun from building up her nuking potential. As mixed parts, I do have to rate her just a little bit lower at a 7 out of 10 though, because even as a pure set, while she is extremely synergetic, her parts are kind of implicitly requiring that you use something of the same families together with them. So for instance, with Combustion, it is going to be very heavily implicit on the fact that you use something that will apply a damage over time effect, specifically from fire effects to self. So anything with Flame, Double Fire, or anything else like can build on that, which makes it a fairly picky leg to use. Whereas Meteor Beam, Flame, and Double Fire, especially with Flame and Double Fire being non-heavy, are things that you should be able to use fairly solid and consistently, albeit you want to make sure you have a healer on the team to make sure you don't lose too much HP over time.